At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Lauren, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
I'm really excited to have you on the show because as I've looked over your website and your bio and so forth and your expertise, I find that it's really unusual. And
Okay.
and I'll talk about that from the standpoint of wording that you use and descriptions that you
Mm,
use. But what I'd love for you to do is what I find is there's always a story. There's always a
yes.
journey. And I'd love for you to share your journey with the audience, kind of give a background of who you are, and then kind of share your journey of what brought you to this point where you are helping women in the way that you are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So I can be a little bit of a talker. So I'll give you the mini who I am now, what I'm really passionate about. So, entrepreneur, speaker, podcast host myself, transformational facilitator, and somatic life coach. And I do a lot of work with women, especially women when it comes to dating and relationships. So, a lot of work on embodying feminine energy, femininity, all of that kind of stuff. And I really love to work with women in that capacity because I come from being very much a overachiever, boss babe, kind of like hustle, go, 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 nonstop kind of woman. And while that resulted in a lot of really incredible things in my life, in many ways, it also had a lot of things, resulted in a lot of results that I didn't quite love in my life, especially related to marriage, relationships, that sort of thing. So I work with women to help them heal their nervous system, reprogram their subconscious mind to really step into that innate magnetism that women have and help women break free from that boss babe hustle culture kind of life, really own their worth and work on that worthiness journey, stand more firm in their power and really invite more ease and flow into their lives. And I used to focus just on personal growth with women and everything like that, and shifted over the last 2 years, I would say, into more dating and relationships because I have worked with so many women who, again, they're successful go-getters in so many areas of their lives. And you would see them and say, like, wow, she's got it all together, right? But who would struggle with dating, would struggle with relationships, and have very similar struggles when it came to relationships. And those being like, I just can't meet a man who's manly enough or masculine enough for me and stuff like that. And a lot of the times, these kinds of women, and I was one of these kinds of women as well, have a lot of similar patterns, similar wounds, similar blocks, and things that we can work on to make it so that that is no longer a big hurdle, I guess, in their lives. And a little bit backing up to kind of my story and
Yeah.
journey, I was the classic overachiever, perfectionist, workaholic, like all of that. So somebody who was very stuck in my masculine energy, but also I was that way like my whole life, right? So excelled in sports. I did music. I did theater. Was good at school, like all the things, perfectionist and all the things. And that was very encouraged, which is amazing. And as I'm sure you can imagine, fast forward to college or even early in my career, I double majoring, I'm workaholic, like all that kind of stuff. And that brought a lot of amazing results. Like I said, success, good career accolades, like money, all of that. But it was also me very much operating in a survival pattern in a lot of ways. And so live my whole life in this overachiever, workaholic kind of space. I ended up getting married in, when was this? 10 years ago. Oh my gosh, 10 years ago at this point in 2015, to a good man and to a man who complimented me at the time in the sense that I was very much in my masculine energy. And so he was very much in his feminine energy. And as I started to do a lot of the work on myself, the inner work, and the work I started doing was around the unworthiness the perfectionism, the overachieving, all of that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't about like masculine, feminine stuff at all. It was that stuff. But as I started to work on those things, I started to really like find more balance in that feminine and masculine energy, because a lot of that high achieving, go, 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 like success, drive, push, that kind of energy is the masculine energy. And so as I
Yeah.
learned how to balance that out, because I was chasing a lot of that, because there's nothing wrong. I want to be clear with the men and women listening. There's nothing wrong with being successful, being driven, anything like that, being excited and passionate about your career and having goals, right? But for me, and I know for so many women too who can relate, I was chasing a lot of that for validation, because that's what made me feel worthy, feel valuable, all of that. So if I was successful, if people thought I was amazing, all these things, that filled my tank, right? Instead of my tank being filled with through other means. And so as I started to heal those pieces, that masculine feminine energy harmonization started to balance out more. And then I started to do more work on that. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, this is, now that I'm not occupying the masculine energy in my relationship, it's not really, we don't really have that in our relationship. And so spent a few years really working on that stuff and trying to figure it out, and ultimately decided to split up. And so I got divorced in 2020. While COVID was happening, like all the things are going on at the same time. So COVID divorce, and that threw me into a lot of deep healing. So even more deep healing, right? And that's where I started to learn about somatic healing. I'm certified in somatic healing, which has been incredibly powerful and amazing for my own journey and growth, and started to learn a lot more about relationships, right? Because I was fascinated by like, okay, how did I get into what brought me here? Right. And if that was, because it was ultimately my choice to end the marriage, if that wasn't the marriage that I wanted, right? Like what brought me there? And now if I want something different, what growth do I get to step into to have a different outcome in the future, right? To change what my relationship and dating life looks like from here on out. And so that's the long but short way of how we got here.
Okay. So double major. What were your majors?
Communications and graphic design. So studio art. And it was the sort of thing where I went to a lovely liberal arts college in Santa Barbara, California. Like can't complain, right? My school is a little private school in Montecito. We'd go to the beach all the time. Like it was amazing. And I went in with a lot of course, remember, overachiever. I went in with a lot of AP credits and stuff like that, where I could have graduated a year early, right? And saved my parents a year of private school tuition. But instead, I chose to do more school. So I'm like, I've got all the room. Let's do two majors instead of one. And so basically went through the course book and circled all the classes that sounded really cool to me, and then saw, okay, a lot of these line up with communications. Then that makes sense as the major I want to do, right? And then I've always loved to be creative and do art, so I did graphic design as well.
So did you go into some type of business, or did you work for a major company, or what happened
Yeah.
there? And how
Yeah,
long were you
so
doing that?
absolutely. So after college, I went right into working at an ad agency. So I've always loved that intersection of like strategic communication and so like the psychology behind it, when there's visual aspects as well. So went into working at an ad agency, and then went down the PR route, started working at a PR agency as well. Took a little break before the PR agency, took a little break because I was like, you know what, maybe advertising isn't the direction. Maybe I want to be more in the creative side of things. Went to New York City and did an internship program there that focused mainly on more of the art side of things. And it was there that I was like, you know what, the like artist direction, I think I want to keep that more as the hobby and like in my tool belt, but not the main thing. So went back into more the marketing side of things, and was in PR for several years, and then left that last company I worked for in, when would that have been? 2014? Yes, I think 2014, to start my own business. And in those, 10 years now since doing my own thing, I owned my own agency for a while. And then I also have had a fitness business too. I was an athlete for a long time. So I had a fitness business, but did PR for several years, including my own agency, and started leaning into coaching more in 2020. And just this past year merged my agency with another agency. So I got to take that CEO hat off, which was really nice. And I get to focus a lot more of my energy on my coaching work.
Wow. Talk about someone who really wants to accomplish a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Well,
and I find that's true of many people, both
yeah.
men and women.
And I think it's interesting because I think it used to be much more about the how it looked and the accomplishments and that sort of thing, like I said, for the validation and the self-worth and all of that. And really like the last, 8 or so years, it's been so much more about like what feels exciting and interesting to me, right? Because I'm not so much driven by, oh, this is my dream job and that's what I have to do. And I'm going to do this forever. It's like, oh, in this season and chat, like, what am I passionate about? What's exciting? What can I see doing for a long time? But yeah, like I have been blessed to be able to try a lot of different things and go in a lot of different directions. And, working for myself the last decade allows a lot of that freedom, which is really great. But I'm very motivated by lifestyle and freedom and getting to, explore what's interesting to me.
Well, you know what I find fascinating, and thank you for being so transparent. I think
Yeah.
that's great. What I find interesting is, as we talk about, and as you talk about, whatever those experiences were in childhood that caused you to have to just do
Mhm.
in order to feel like you're accepted by people in the community and so forth. And yet, and we look back at that, and so many people now are trying to look at that experience as childs or as children and overcome that.
Mhm.
And, we focus on overcoming that. And yet, with your story, and I think it's true of many people, those things caused you to become the person that you became
Mhm.
success wise. And then
Yeah.
ultimately, because you were able to do that, it has allowed you to have that inner sense of understanding and transformation. And now you're doing something entirely different that's making a huge difference for other
Right.
women. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
so, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, obviously, as you went through your own transformation, as we all do that, um, we can approach that as being a victim of that negativity, or we can approach that with gratitude and realize, okay, there's some positive things that came out of this,
Oh,
but
yes.
I can always start a new chapter in my life, or I can
Yes.
have a new beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to be clear, right, like the overachieving perfectionist stuff and all of that, I think that those are patterns that have a lot of very positive side effects, right? And
Right.
and a lot of very socially acceptable and socially rewarded consequences or results, right? So operating that way is going to get you ahead much more than like if I was an underachiever, I would say, right? So if I was a chronic underachiever and that might have the outcome of that or the path that could have taken me could have potentially been very far away from where I would have wanted to go, right? So I can absolutely I absolutely feel so much gratitude for where I'm at in my life, how my life has gone and everything like that. And so being able to see those patterns, oh, this, if I had done this from this way or all of that, it could have saved me some pain and burnout along the way and in my adult life and stuff like that. But I absolutely can see that. Oh, and those habits or those patterns did yield a lot of really, really advantageous results in my life. Absolutely. Right. But it's interesting because it's funny because I will talk to friends about this. I'll talk to my boyfriend about this and be like, gosh, like when I was in my early and mid 20s, working 60 to 80 hours a week. And yes, after a couple of years of that was like having a panic attack in the bathroom at work once a week, like that sort of thing. So it wasn't like a good or sustainable setup, but I was operating at that level for like several years. And whereas now, and I think a lot of people can probably relate to this, probably a lot of, especially women. And I also find I'm going to get really niche here, a lot of neurodivergent women who may relate to my story is then you're in your 30s and you're like, I can't possibly work more than 20 hours. What happened? Like 10 years ago, I was able to like work like a machine nonstop. And now I physically can't. Right. And so it's so interesting because I think now, right, looking back, I'm like, oh, yes, honed so many skills, right? I learned so much and honed a lot of skills that are very, very helpful in my life now, in my career now. And I'm like, yeah, but that gear, right? That gear, 80 hours a week now, I don't know what it would take to get me there.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you here. This is something that I do to a lot of people, and my kids just laugh about it, but it's made a big difference. You've used a couple of words, somatic coaching
Yes.
and neurodivergency.
Yes.
And I guarantee you that there's many people that are listening that have no clue what that means. And even if they go to the dictionary, it may be different than what your definition is. So I'd love for you to, number one, define what is somatic
Absolutely.
living or coaching and so forth. Not the coaching, but what is the somatic?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what is neurodivergency in your mind?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So somatic coaching or somatic healing is about working with the body. So soma means body. And so somatic coaching or healing, or there's also somatic therapy, right? People can get licensed in it as well, is work a lot about working with the nervous system and the subconscious mind. So a lot of getting in tune with your body and things like that. So an example of somatic healing or coaching or somatic work would be something like breath work, right? Like that kind of stuff, really being more in tune with the body, with nervous system regulation. And what I've found as somebody, and this will go into the neurodivergence stuff, which I'll talk about in just a minute, but something that I found as somebody who is very intellectual, right? Like I can intellectualize things very, very well, understand things very, very well. And I was noticing there were patterns in my life or outcomes in my life that I didn't want, right? Like results I did not want. And I was like, why does this keep happening? I understand the exact steps that are happening that are making this happen. I understand that this is not the path I want to take. And yet here we are again, right? And so for me, when the solution, right? And what was really effective for me and what I found with clients, friends, all of that is the somatic work it kind of gets the brain out of the way in a sense. You're not working with the conscious mind that understands all the things, right? You're getting kind of beyond that to the subconscious part that is kind of steering the ship. So I found, at least for me, I haven't done a lot of talk therapy, but I've done a lot of somatic work and things like that. But I've seen this with a lot of other people, is that like talk therapy can get you so far, right? And you might be able to really
not necessarily real effective, by the way, in my opinion.
Exactly. And so that's where I think somatic work is such a powerful tool. And I got into it for my own healing because I was like, there are things that I am just sick of dealing with and sick of thinking about, and I would like them to be eliminated, right? I would like to solve this problem. And so somatic work really helped me with that. And then I got certified so that I could share it with other people. And then neurodivergence is just variations in how the brain works. So you'll have neurodivergent brain operating system and maybe a neurotypical. So somebody who operates more quote unquote normal, I would say, but I don't like to like throw those normal, abnormal kind of words around there. But neurodivergence can include a variety of conditions like dyslexia, autism, ADHD, things like that, where the brain is actually often from and I'm not an expert in this, I just live with it and have done a lot of research on it. So I know a lot from lived experience and just my own fascination. But a lot of the times, either people are born this way or there are like very early stage developmental things that happen that are going to kind of rewire how the brain operates.
Isn't it interesting, especially neurodivergence? And when I was looking at your bio and so forth, I really did a little bit of research on that, and it's fascinating. And you mentioned it. You've got all of these diagnoses of neurodivergence, ADHD, autism, so on and so forth. And what I have found is so often when we see something or experience something that isn't, quote, normal, that we have to put a label on it.
Yeah.
Now, I had a son who, when we were moving and going into high school and leaving the particular school I was at, and he had been challenged a little bit with some stuff. And I said, I'm just curious, and it wasn't going to make a difference, but I'm curious. So go in and test. And so he got tested and he came back, well, we need to put him on this medication and so on and so forth, that type of thing. And when we moved and started a new school, I bought him a little, I don't even know what you call it now, but we use our phones now. But when he went to school, he used that in order to do his homework. And actually, he learned how to print on the printers in the school, as well as control the TV sometimes. But bottom line, he did not go on any medication, and he was not labeled with any of those diagnoses, because what I learned as I had attended different conferences and so forth in my dental profession is that he was just a spatial thinker. Now, even today, as I talk to him, he's starting to label himself a little bit with some of those things. And there's no question that there are real issues like that. But I find it's interesting that when we find that we think differently, that we get labeled. And sometimes that labeling is not accurate. Or can affect our overall sense of who we are. Whereas as I looked up neurodivergent women, here's what I found, and you probably already know this: exceptional emotional intelligence and empathy, creativity and outside the box problem solving, deep focus on meaningful or passion driven work.
I love words of affirmation. Keep going.
Strong intuition and connection to subtle detail or patterns. And it says they struggle with overstimulation, anxiety, low self-esteem because they're not understood, or exhaustion trying to live up to the neurotypical expectations. But the reality is it's a unique ability that if you look at the positive side of that, it's amazing.
Oh yeah. And so I will say with labeling and stuff like that, because I don't like to do a ton of labeling either. And I will say, like, when we're on social media and you're scrolling and all of that, like, it's what helps somebody be like, oh, this might be for me, or I can relate to this, right? So like, just from a communication standpoint, it can be helpful. But the labeling stuff for me, and when I kind of took ownership of the neurodivergent label for myself, as I started to learn more about these things and in my own healing and stuff, and start, getting fed things from my algorithm, whatever social media platform I was on, I was like, that sounds familiar, or this is very helpful. Does this apply to me? Interesting. And as I did more research and spoke with professionals and stuff like that, realized, oh my gosh, like this makes my life experience and makes me make so much more sense. And so for me, it was something that helped me to understand myself in many, many ways, understand my entire life through a much different lens, and a lens that made a lot more sense. And also because I agree, I think that for me, at least, my neurodivergence, and I will say too, like, there are people who are neurodivergent, and it is a very big handicap in their lives, or they're handicapped as a result of it, right? Or it's just a big, big impediment. So I'm very blessed and grateful to be very incredibly high functioning, and to where I now, through thankfully no medication or anything like that, but through a lot of healing work, awareness, education, like all of that, I'm at a place where I get to really lean into the benefits of it. And I get to really like the cool parts of it, and the fun parts of it, the stuff that I think is just fascinating and wouldn't want to change at all, which I think are part of that. I get to like crank those up a lot. And the stuff that makes it very challenging, that stuff isn't that challenging anymore, because I've learned how to manage it, right? And it's tough sometimes, because it's, I think people sometimes can think, oh, we'll just like heal it and fix it, or blah, 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 that sort of thing. And it's like, no, like my brain is actually different, like, and people who are like this, like our brains and how they're wired are actually different. And yes, there's healing that you can do. Absolutely. But I think it's more about learning how to, yes, doing the healing work, but then learning how to like dance with your uniqueness. And the other part to that too is like, neurodivergent versus neurotypical. Everyone's brain is different, right?
Absolutely.
So like what it's like in my brain is going to be so different than anyone else's brain. And so keeping that in mind, even a neurotypical person to another neurotypical person, like their brains operate differently. So I think like really owning your uniqueness and understanding yourself, and then keeping in mind that anyone, whether it's the person you're in a relationship with, your family members, friends, clients, whoever it is, like their brains are going to operate how their brains operate. And you get to understand, do your best to understand that so you can work with it.
Well, and what's interesting now, we're talking about three different things here. We're talking about women who experience greater masculinity in their life and have not really been able to tap into the feminine aspect. We're talking about neurodivergency. We're talking about, somatic healing and so forth. But let's go back to relationships for a minute, okay? You talked about the fact that you really had that masculine energy and we're not really tapped into the feminine energy that you had. And, I think with the women's movement, and please forgive me if I say anything that might be triggering.
Go ahead.
But it seems like with the women's movement, and justifiably so, because of the patriarchal history of our culture that in my mind is not valid, that we have the women's movement. They really were forced to move into that masculinity role in order to just experience their own personal identity. And yet what happens then is, as you did, you end up marrying someone that's usually you're attracted to your opposite in some senses, at least initially, until you figure things out. And so all of a sudden they become the masculine part of a relationship. Well, it's fine if you've got a man who's more on that right brain, feminine, whatever you want to call it, aspect. But so many times those women also end up marrying a masculine man. And that becomes a major issue, because then on the man's side, they're looking for that natural feminine woman who's kind, who's loving, who's all of that is not being experienced because of the masculinity focus of their wife or their spouse. What are your thoughts on that?
So many thoughts. So I agree that the women's movement, feminism, that kind of stuff, I will say it's not, I don't know, complicated, but I want to say a lot of that happened, changes that my mom saw in her life and stuff like that. I am so grateful that so many people fought hard so that women in my generation, we have choices, right? We have so many choices. We can do, whatever we want with our lives, all that kind of stuff, get bank accounts, buy property, whatever it is, right? We can do all these things from a legal standpoint and right standpoint and all of that. And I will say, I completely agree to your point as well, that it pushed a lot of women like in that like pursuit of finding their own identity or finding, our own identity as women and stuff like that. Women were pushed into the direction of like be more like men, right? Instead of like owning more what it means to be a woman, it was really like go out and do the same things as men because you're the same, right? And I know it wasn't like you're the same, but that like message of equality got pushed as, I think, in a sense, and obviously I wasn't there witnessing it, but encouraged a lot of women to act like men and to step into those more masculine roles in a lot of way, which I think, I'm seeing in my generation a lot of women who went that like boss babe go getter kind of life and chose that path, and then are like, oh, but why do I struggle with relationships? Why am I still single? Why I would have wanted a family? Why did I spend so much time like grinding in my career and stuff like that? Like, why wasn't I prioritizing this earlier? Why didn't I choose better earlier in my life and stuff like that? And so I think that on the one hand, like, yes, it's important for women to have equal rights and choices and all of that. Absolutely. And yes, the women's movement, I think, pushed women to pursue independence the way that it looks for men also.
Well,
Which was
yeah.
to
Yeah, go
their
ahead,
to
finish.
our detriment, right? Like, and that's not that, I think there's a lot of and especially like in the work that I do, again, like I'm a very like independent and self-sufficient woman and stuff like that. And so like I've done a lot of work to undo a lot of that for myself, just that programming. But I see a lot of women working to or like struggling with like how like undoing that programming, because they're finding, wait a second, this isn't the life I want. Sure, I've like made a lot of money or I've had this success and stuff like that, but like this isn't what I want, and
Yeah.
which is scary, I think.
Well, and I've even seen the discrimination, at least, in my generation and a few generations before me or after me, where there's really a discrimination and almost bullying of women who want to be at home, have
Yeah.
children, be a homemaker,
Hmm.
and they're kind of put down because
Yeah.
they really have achieved that feminine side for them. And how do you help those women that are experiencing that sense of, I just want to be a mom. I want to be a wife. I want
Mm.
to be a homemaker. I want to be able to show forth that love and kindness and so forth. How do you help them overcome the societal expectations and, in some respects, discrimination?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think, and it's probably easier said than done for a lot of people, but the only person like forces you need to be looking for approval from and worried about, like, I would say are gods and then like the closest people in your life. So whether that's a spouse, like, yourself, right? So God, yourself, maybe your spouse, your closest friends, like that sort of thing, and not worrying about or putting a lot of weight on the outside chatter. And again, easier said than done, because you might have family members who are bullying you or talking down to you because that's what you want to pursue, instead of maybe less focused on a career and more focused on relationship and stuff like that. And I would say just when you get really anchored in the vision you want for your life, allowing that to lead you and trusting that. I would also say to that point too, that I think, because I see a lot of discourse on social media, because social media is so like black and white
Oh,
and
I
the
know.
extremes and stuff like that, right? Of like people talk, whether it's women or people like wanting to coach women around like just marry a wealthy provider man and don't worry about it, and you'll have this soft life and not stress about anything or anything like that. And well, like at pure face value, sure, that sounds nice, and still having to live in reality, right? And be responsible and stuff like that. And so I think for women, like it's very good to have a certain level of education, to have skills yourself in case you need it, or if you get, I don't know, bored or anything like that. But also, right, I think there is a lot of risk potentially to putting your entire livelihood, future, everything like that dependent on one person that's not you. And that doesn't mean, I'm not meaning to say don't trust your partner, your husband, anything like that. But it's, I think, a good idea to still have like some of it, whether it's your own money or your own stuff or your own like career or skills to be able to fall back on just in case, because stuff happens. Things don't always go according to plan, all of that. There are plenty of stories of women whose relationships have started out like that, perfect fairy tale, and then went to a very dark place and stuff. And so I think it's just good to be, to also like, be, to protect yourself too.
Well, and I always talk about the difference between either or both and.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've talked about before in my interviews with people, they've talked about it, I've listened, but women who have reached their 40s or 50s, they have been the mother, they've been the
Mm-hmm.
homemaker, they've just enjoyed that. And all of a sudden, guess what? The kids are gone.
Yeah.
And probably 80% of that focus that they had with their kids is no longer there. And now what do? Have you found that as you work with women, you find women in that situation where all of a sudden they're experiencing some real trouble because all of a sudden their kids are gone, and that whole focus of what you would call the feminism, the homemaking and so forth, there isn't as much opportunity there. And now, as you
Yeah.
say, they need to find things to do so that they don't get
Yeah.
literally bored.
Right. And because it might not be a thing where like, oh no, I'm out on my own, but it could just be like, oh wait, now like what I was pouring my heart and soul and time into, like I don't have that anymore and I don't necessarily have hobbies. Like what do I do? Right. And I will say like if a woman is not, feeling full emotionally and all of that kind of stuff, not that, it's she's in charge of herself, but like a woman's energy is felt. And so I think like in a healthy relationship, if that woman's feeling unfulfilled, even if it's for her own purpose and stuff like that, like that is going to be have a ripple effect into the family and all of that. And so I think and I've worked with a few women who are, in their 50s, 60s, that sort of thing, a bit older than me, which is so cool and like such a special thing for me to like give advice to somebody that I would likely go to for advice. But worked with women who, might be a little bit younger than my mom and who are like, oh, I never really was able to explore this kind of stuff or be as like unapologetically me and really like own my feminine power, like growing up and stuff like that. And so I've I've had women work with me in coaching context, do programs with me and stuff like that, who dive into this journey as like the empty nester, right? Or like when their kids are in college and stuff like that, and they have chosen to really like go on that personal growth journey and that embodiment journey for themselves and find so much fulfillment from it, and just like it like lights this new kind of fire in them, which is really, really cool to see. But I do think it is something where it's like, okay, like in this now, in this chapter, in this season of your life, like what do you, okay, you've got a whole bunch of time and energy to work with. Like what sounds exciting to you? What feels exciting? Okay, then let's explore it. Let's see what that looks like.
So, in a brief amount of time, how on earth do you help a woman who is so focused on that masculine energy? How do you help them to move and open
Mm.
up that feminine side and not necessarily, well, diminish the masculine a little bit and get it more into a balance, the both and rather than the either or?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, um, I like to start small, like little, like baby steps of that. And I remember when I was first starting in that journey myself, even just with my personal growth and stuff. I remember like when I started meditating or, sitting in silence, because that was so hard for me. I would set a timer on my phone, close my eyes, and I'd be like, okay, I set it for 5 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever it was. And I'd be like, something's wrong. Something must be wrong. And I open my eyes to check and I'm like, oh, I've gone 90 seconds, right? Like, wow, that's where I'm at. I can't even sit longer than 90 seconds. And so in the beginning of this journey, we start small. And so there's a few things. So if we think about masculine energy is output energy, penetrative energy, it's more the thinking, the action, like decisiveness, all of that. Like, again, that linear output energy. Whereas feminine energy is more our being, our emotions, more intuitive, more about the feelings, is more about receiving. And so what I like to do, a few things I like to do with women is, let's say, like, set a 5-minute timer and go sit outside on your front lawn and just sit there on the ground, close your eyes. And for 5 minutes, I just want you to tap into your sensory experiences. Feminine energy is also about sensuality, which isn't just, sexual in nature, but sensuality as in being connected to your senses, right? And very, very
Right.
present in the moment. So go sit outside for 5 minutes and notice how many things you can hear. Like, how many different kinds of birds can you hear making noise? Is the like, are the leaves rustling in the wind? That sort of thing. Is a car driving by, a neighbor taking a walk? Like, what can you hear? Then, like, what can you smell? Can you smell the grass? Can you smell flowers around you? All of that. How does it feel? Is the grass beneath you scratchy? Is the ground hard? Is there a rock under that side of your hip or something like that, right? Is there a breeze that you can feel on your skin? Like, is the sun shining on you? So just really tuning into that sensory experience for a couple minutes at a time. So that's one of the, like, really simple things. Another thing I love to encourage women to do, especially my, like, hyper independent, I don't need anyone's help, I am a boss babe, can do all the things myself kind of woman, is to be open to receive help, support, like, even not even just help, but just to receive, even when you don't need it. Because that's the difference, right? Because I find, and I used to be like this too, could do every single thing myself, and I know a lot of women can relate. But I would ask for help once I was already well past my breaking point. Like, I'm in breakdown, like crying, having a meltdown, and then I'll ask someone for help because I physically and mentally can't actually do it myself anymore. But doesn't it make a little bit more sense to maybe ask for some support before you get to that moment, right? Before you're forced into it. And so another little thing is, like I said, just being open to receive, right? And so this can look as simple as, like, and I use this example all the time, but like, I go, there's a store around the corner from me where I get my spring water filled up in those big, huge jugs that are super heavy and stuff like that. And so when I get those filled up, and the employee, not every single time, but will often ask, because I'm usually coming in with a few of those, hey, would you like some help getting those out to your car? And they have carts and stuff like that. But if I'm being asked that, I will generally, and again, this is an employee that works there, right? So I'm not really concerned about, like, weird energy, or if I'm, like, anything like that, if it's a man and stuff. And I'll say, you know what? That would be amazing. Thank you so much. Can I do that myself? Absolutely. Have I done it myself? Yes, I have. Would it be nice and make my life feel a little softer and easier if someone helped me carry these heavy water jugs out to my car? Yes, right? So being open to receive, because something else I've noticed with women like this is they're very blocked off to receiving, especially to receiving from men, and often see that receiving as, oh, well, if I accept this, then do I owe you something? Like, do I owe you? And we can even get so, like, boil it down so much to even compliments, right? And again, I want women to, like, use discernment. If a man is offering and stuff like that, you want to use your judgment, because there could be an expectation, or, like, the energy might be
Right.
off and stuff like that. But even if, like, notice with your friends, or, like, someone out when you're grocery shopping or something, if someone compliments you, oh my gosh, like, I love your outfit, right? Instead of, or like, oh my gosh, you're so funny, or you're so pretty, whatever it is, instead of, is your knee-jerk reaction to say, oh, no, 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 like, no, oh no, you are, right? To just, like, like, ping pong it right back at them, or deflect it, or not even hear it, not even receive it? Or can you actually sit there and receive that compliment, right? Because if you have trouble just receiving somebody's kind words, it's going to be a lot harder to receive somebody's actions. And so if a lot of these women are like, I just want a man who's takes action and is a provider and like protector and masculine, right? Masculine men like to take action. They like to like are have servant hearts and stuff like that, right? They like to pour into and like be supportive and stuff. And so if you're not able to receive somebody's words to you, it's going to be a lot harder to receive someone's actions, and you're not going to feel worthy of the actions and everything. So that's even another one of those tiny, tiny ways to like release that like masculine kind of grip on things and be more in your feminine, is just by way of receiving in those little moments.
Okay, great. And we've run out of time.
Okay.
So I think we could do another one here and have a
I
whole
think
other
so.
discussion. So as we end, how do people find you, and particularly how do they find your podcast? Because I'm sure this is what you
Absolutely.
talk about on your podcast, right?
Yes, 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 yes. So you can find me at laurensalaun.com. You can also find me at Lauren Salaun on Instagram as well as TikTok. My last name is spelled Salaun. And my podcast is called Amplify with Lauren. And yes, we talk about all kinds of things: personal growth, somatics, healing, relationships, dating, all of that.
Fantastic. And so as we close, what would be that final message that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, so I'm all about authenticity and magnetism. And so I would say the most magnetic thing that you can do is being unapologetically yourself. So being your most authentic self. And when you stop trying to be what you think everybody else wants you to be, right? Like fitting into what everyone else thinks you should do and be what the world wants. When you stop doing that, you become very, very irresistible to the people and the opportunities that are meant to you. So if you want to be the most magnetic, be your unapologetically authentic self.
Love it. Lauren, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's been great. And like I say, it always amazes me how quickly time goes by.
I know.
And particularly with our discussion here, it's like there's so many things we didn't even get to. And like I say, I'd love to have you on the show again and talk even more about some of those things. So
Absolutely.
think about
I'd be
that.
happy to. I would be happy to.
All
Thank you
right,
so much for
great.
having me.
And folks, thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this because I've really enjoyed this one. So I hope you have too. And look forward to having you join us again soon. This is Dr. Doug saying namaste.